The e-commerce world is crazy. Some might even say it's on fire right now because tariffs are throwing everything off. And yet I am still bullish. I am still bullish on D2C as a business. A few months ago, I recorded an episode at the beginning of this year. I was doing my reflections at the end of 2024 and thinking through a bunch of different predictions about what e-commerce is going to be like going forward. And I made the case that e-commerce and D2C is a great business to be in right now. I'm overall bullish on it. I recorded an episode also about being bearish on it, just, to sort of do the alternative case. But since that time, goods from China in the US have been tariffed at a gigantic rate, which is definitely a real problem. And the macroeconomic situation is crazy. Consumer confidence has plummeted. It has hit the lowest number that it's hit in a very, very long time. Some of that consumer confidence is divided along political lines, but it's gone way down for everybody. It's a crazy moment to be running a business. And yet, I want to make the case right now that there is still a lot of reason to be optimistic about the future, and not just to be optimistic, but to be building intelligently in your D2C business. And some of this is going to be similar to things I've said before, but some of this can be a little bit different. And there's a couple of particular angles that I see right now as I approach this issue that I want to talk through, because they continue to form my total approach to what I think is happening in the e-commerce space right now, and really my total approach to how e-commerce brands ought to operate. I want to start with this case by making a distinction, okay, which is that there is a distinction here between the long term and the short term of what I believe is happening in e-commerce right now. I think no matter what else I say, the short term could be real bumpy. I'm going to come back around to what I think you should do about that in a little bit. But to begin, I just want to acknowledge that. I'm not saying that everything is rosy and easy, that everything is perfect and smooth, and that anybody who's complaining is lying and is weak and is cheap or whatever it is, right? It's not that at all. I mean, it's a really hard moment for a lot of brands. For some, it's like an existentially threatening moment. I fully get that. In fact, I think that no matter what I say next, there are going to be brands that are going to be casualties of this whole thing. So I don't mean to gloss over that at all. I've just been trying to assess the moment in light of the larger things that I believe about e-commerce and figure out how those things fit together. And so what I want to do is play back and forth the short and the long term of what I believe in this present moment. Okay, so the broader thing that I want to point out here is something that I've pointed out before, which is this crucial thing about e-commerce in the US, at least, and I'm thinking really of the US specifically here, which is that e-commerce as a percentage of retail is still growing. E-commerce as a percentage of retail is still growing. And that point anchors so much of what I think, because as long as that is the case, as long as more people are buying stuff online, especially if that is paired with growing retail in general, like if total GMV across all retail is growing, if both the pie is getting larger and the e-commerce slice of the pie is getting larger, and I believe both of those things are true, then the opportunity for people selling products on the internet is really strong, especially if that continues in the way that it has happened before, which is roughly 1 percentage point per year over the last 10 years, right? So we're up to now over 18% of all retail in the US happening online. And I just think almost everybody underrates how big of a factor this is. Yes, it makes the barrier to entry lower to other people, for sure. But this point just remains really crucial to me, that is still expanding. And as long as that is the case, there's a really good opportunity in e-commerce. And so there is a challenge in the present moment, to be sure, but there is also a real tailwind behind people who are e-commerce sellers. And this is, I believe, why, as I've said before, there are so many big e-commerce brands right now that there have not been in the past, right? In my 10 years in e-commerce, brands are there are many more much larger brands than there used to be. That's a really big deal. And as much as people like to complain and say, talk about how things have been difficult for the last bunch of years or whatever it is, people who are making those complaints are often people with very large businesses. And so I just don't really, I just think there's a really big opportunity here for lots and lots of brands. Okay. So that's like a baseline sort of grounding economic principle. And if you think about that as a macroeconomic principle outside of your control, then you can sort of stack that up against tariffs and the sort of general macroeconomic uncertainty of the present moment and say, which one of those do I expect to be more long-term? Because they're both macroeconomic factors outside of my control. So which one do I think is more likely to last? And this is a crucial part of everything else I'm going to say. What I basically believe is that this present moment is a crazy blip that is going to be difficult and have some casualties, but it's a blip. And that at some point, who knows how long, right, this is going to end. And I think, by the way, there's pretty good evidence so far that this is not something that is going to carry on for forever, because so far, all of the other tariffs that President Trump has put into effect and his team has put into effect, right, have pretty much all of them, I think, have had a short-termism to them, especially some of the larger claims around tariffs. They have gone away very fast and been renegotiated very fast, and they often do seem like negotiating tactics. Now, China and the U.S. relationship, I have no political predictions about this. I actually don't have much to say politically in general, and I just want to say clearly, I really don't have. I voted third party in the last year, right? So I don't have a very strong opinion about, in either direction, pro or against President Trump and his policies and those things. It's not where this is coming from, is all I mean to say. Okay. All I'm trying to do is assess what I can best think of in the present moment in terms of how these things will play out. And as best as I can see it, I think the most likely thing is that this is not a forever thing. The most recent numbers I saw on Polymarket were that there was a 50% chance of a renegotiated trade agreement with the U.S. and or at least the betting market was set at 50% for a renegotiated trade agreement between the U.S. and China in the next couple of months. I'm recording this in the last day of April. I think that was like a July timeline or something like that. I can't remember now. But the point is, there's reasonable amounts of people putting their money where their mouth is, saying that there's a pretty decent chance, coin flip chance, that this goes away within 2 months. Now, if that happens, and we've seen the way that public equity markets have responded to any positive tariff news, i.e. any news of tariffs going away, markets have responded extremely quickly. The macroeconomic response to tariffs has been fast. So there's possibly a way of looking at this where if this is actually a quicker, shorter term thing, and I don't think this is just Pollyannish for me to say this. I think there's plenty of reason to think that this is at least one very reasonably likely output that you could handicap at, say, 50% in the next couple of months. That becomes a much shorter term thing. And then on the other side, there is a longer term reality of macroeconomic tailwinds for e-commerce businesses in the U.S. And the other thing you can add on top of general retail and on top of e-commerce as a percentage of U.S. retail, is the international component of all of this. First of all, this is a possible way to solve some of your tariff problems if you can grow your overseas business, your international business. Okay, so there's that. But secondly, if you can actually just not import at all, right? If you can send your products to other places. But secondly, if there is, if there's also a growing revenue base in other countries as countries throughout the world continue to grow in their GDP, basically. And I think that's very clearly the case in the last bunch of years, what's called the last 20 years. So if you look at a 10, 20-year timeline for a lot of these businesses, you can start to think that there's a growing customer pool all over the place. And those, to me, seem like the much larger economic trends over the longer time period. So the question is, how do you survive the difficult times in the midst of the larger tailwinds? Now, that's some basic analysis of where I think the world is at right now, as best as I can tell. Of course, that can all get destroyed in any 1 second for all kinds of reasons. And again, the U.S.-China relationship in particular strikes me as particularly volatile. But there's a basic principle. But what I actually want to get to is some other specific things that I see right now happening in our space that are really significant in the way that I think people are using their money. And there's actually one crucial thing that I think is pushing e-commerce's businesses forward in 3 different areas of business, okay? And the first is on the OpEx side, and that is the margin expanding power of AI. You should join Workspace 6. Workspace 6 is a private community with over 900 high-level executives and operators from e-commerce businesses, 7, 8, and 9-figure brands. And look, it's really hard if you just engage in the community a little bit. It's really hard to not get value in excess of the cost of being in a great community like Workspace 6. Workspace 6 is $1 for the first month, so you can check it out for yourself, and then $99 a month after that with no commitment, and you'll write it off. So really, it's even cheaper than that. And if you do that, right, then you will join a community of really smart, thoughtful e-commerce executives and operators who are going to do all the things that a community can uniquely do, which is like tell you what's working in their businesses right now. They can get together on things like supply chain and tariff challenges and brainstorm on how they're going to solve these problems. They can give you all kinds of insight into software and services. And by the way, no software providers and no service providers are allowed in the community. I know a few of my clients are in Workspace 6. I have no idea what they have said about me because I'm not allowed in there. So you keep, service providers with our grubby mitts off of your money. Instead, you can talk honestly in those kinds of places without hurting anybody's feelings or anything like that. Get honest feedback about the things that you are seeing, compare prices, all of that kind of stuff. You could probably save the money in excess of the membership fees for Workspace 6 just by doing that. Like, just find out how much other people are paying for the same software you're using and then use it as a negotiating tactic with your software service provider. Like, just do that. Just do that and you will make more money than the cost of the membership, on top of the many other good benefits. It's ultimately a really great, really well-run Slack community. They've also built an AI tool recently that allows you to ask it basically any question and it will go and give you the answer from past Slack conversations. So basically the combined knowledge of all of Workspace 6 and all of our operators from all that time. You can get access to that in real time with the AI tool. Really, really cool stuff. Great people. I've been reading their newsletter for forever. I'm so happy to recommend them to you. Workspace6.io. Go check it out today. It's an interesting time for me to be in the agency business because I have no idea what AI is going to do to agency margins and what the expectation of what an agency even is and does every day in the world of AI. I've thought about trying to push more aggressively on building a larger agency business. I'm considering doing this more, which I've resisted doing for the last couple of years of this business, but I'm really starting to think about it a little bit more. And I was thinking about that before AI, but now with AI, it's an interesting thing to think about. Like, should I go and try to be more aggressive with an agency business in a world where AI has a real potential to, let's say, devastate agency margins? It could really, really hurt agency margins. I think that's definitely a possible outcome of AI. And so what do I do and what do I think about that? Well, here's the thing. Among other things, the possibility of AI killing agency margins means that it also creates margins somewhere else. That is, the loss of my margin as an agency is potentially the gain of your margin as an operator. If it kills my margins, it's probably because the margin is accruing to yours, because services that once were very expensive get a lot cheaper, and software that once was very expensive gets a lot cheaper. And the winner in that is not the software business or the service business, though possibly it's them too, depending on a few things, okay? But it's you, it's the operator, it's the e-commerce brand. And if that's the case, then it's a really, really good time to be in e-commerce because you are the one who could do this. There's a similar dynamic at play with offshoring, though I don't want to spend as much time on this. I recently had some friends discussing, like, man, it just seems like the opportunity to connect global talent to US-based businesses is really strong right now. And they were sort of musing on the question, how do I get in on that business? Right? How do I do that? Because it seems like it could be a really, really good business because more and more US businesses are going to hire offshore talent like I've done with my business. Okay. And my thought about that was, how do you do that? You start an e-commerce business. That's how you take advantage of the moment. You don't go create a talent agency to do that. I mean, maybe you could, but that's not what I would do. What I would say is, if what you're saying is there's a margin opportunity for e-commerce businesses via offshoring, okay, then start the e-commerce business and offshore and build a remote team where your OpEx gets lower. Let's put those together. If you combine that with AI and think about the possibility of margin happening in both those places, your OpEx as a percentage of your revenue can get extremely low in a US-based e-commerce business. And I'm certainly not the first person to point this out. I've heard people talk about the idea of, 9-figure brands being run by 5 people and stuff like that. And I think that's really possible. But it is a real opportunity. And it's one of the reasons I think being in e-commerce business is a really strong thing. So now that raises another question. Does that lower the barrier to entry so much and maybe push prices down for all e-commerce goods that it, maybe makes it so that there's more players, and even with expanding TAM of customers just across all of e-commerce, like I was saying earlier, maybe that creates sort of a super low barrier to entry and makes it so that Temu, the Temus and Sheins of the world, or Shine, or however you say that, right? Obviously not direct from China with tariff stuff, but just like that kind of thing. There becomes like this extreme low price pressure for people who can build really big businesses really fast at even with low prices. And does that just sort of kill everybody? Well, here's what I'd say. In general, great technological tools accrue the most value to skilled people first. So if you are already the kind of person listening to or watching this podcast, it means you are already engaged in the e-commerce world now. And probably a lot of you have been in it for a while, because I know some of you who listen to or watch my podcast, right? You've been at this for a long time. That means you are the skilled person with a giant head start in this. And my guess is you are the person who has the most opportunity to do this. And therefore, in e-commerce business with AI, and we'll nod to offshoring as well, okay, could potentially run extremely low OpEx as a percentage of revenue. And of course, when one part of your P&L costs decrease, you can either increase your costs on another part of your P&L, or you can just take the profit. And that creates a real big profit opportunity for someone. I'm starting to think that is like a really, really big thing and a reason to basically be extremely bullish on e-commerce as a business, okay? Number two, the emphasis on incrementality and ad spend continues to grow. So if number one was about OpEx, that part of your P&L, let's talk about your CAC, okay? And there's a lot to say about CAC, and there's a lot to say about how just like increasing conversation around YouTube and AppLovin, and I've mentioned that before, that additional ad channels are possibly viable here for all kinds of reasons. And that would be a real tailwind for e-commerce people who have been stuck on Meta for a really long time, right? But let's recognize that underneath that, in fact, part of what's driving uptake of those channels is incrementality. Okay, Common Thread Collective recently put out a podcast where they said YouTube is this place where you can spend a whole bunch of money, and you should be considering doing that, and it can be really good. And do you know what the core argument was? The core argument was exactly the same as Olivia Corey's core argument from House Analytics when she came on my podcast and talked about this. The in-platform reporting, which has previously held you back, in fact, is drastically underreporting the value of your YouTube spend. And if you measure with incrementality, you are going to see that it actually performs much better. The increasing place of incrementality is forcing brands to start thinking more carefully about the best form of measurement possible. And the cost of incrementality is going down all over the place. Whereas initially I'd seen lots of like 8-figure per month costs for incrementality services and software and those sorts of things. I'm now seeing costs much lower. CTC, in fact, just announced that they are making it so that they're going to do it for free if you join CTC. I don't know much about that service. I haven't looked at it very closely, but it's a pretty compelling thing that they could potentially build that. You can already run a Facebook conversion lift study for free in Facebook, right? Google's got a brand lift study and probably will develop that even more. The cost of that way of thinking is now getting lower every day. Like, it's already happening, and it's going to keep getting lower. And more people are going to get away from flawed measurement tools and get towards incrementality tools. Now, there's always a risk at some point that with incrementality, it becomes this thing that becomes a sort of narrow pursuit in a way that actually doesn't serve you very well. It becomes short-sighted and too measurement focused, and people stop thinking about brand, etc. Although I'll say at the same time, I see increasing conversation. I've certainly seen it on my podcast about more effort around brand building and product releases as the true drivers of e-commerce success. So people are also starting to think more about that, which is really good. But this incrementality focus, I think, mostly is going to help brands spend their money more effectively and more efficiently, and potentially also allow them to grow faster by testing new channels in appropriate ways. And in fact, I'll tell you, I have seen beta versions in a couple of ad accounts I've looked at for Meta ads where you can actually change your optimization or your attribution from standard attribution to incremental attribution. And they're trying to build that tool straight into Meta so that you don't even need a third-party tool. Like, that is crazy, to where that would just be like the standard measurement. They're going to get there at some point. I haven't seen tons of rollout of this. I haven't seen tons of release, but that's a really big deal, because if we can measure the performance of our ads better, then at the same time, we can allocate our ads more efficiently, grow faster, grow more profitably, grow more efficiently, etc. That's a really big deal. And again, if you just sort of zoom out, right, and think AI, incrementality, like these two things that I just mentioned, okay? AI and incrementality are two things that I would say, if you look at the longer trend line on these, I think that the up and to the right trend line growth of those, both in quality and quantity, like the ease of access, the cost of it's going to go down on both of those. All of those things are pointing to longer term trends of tailwinds for e-commerce brands, even if there's a short term headwind with something like tariffs. Now, again, this assumes the tariff headwind is short term, but those are two really big ones where the technology is getting better, the services are getting cheaper all the time, and in fact, of course, the incrementality tools are powered by AI, right? So that's just a really big deal. Okay, there's that. Okay. Number 3. So we've talked about OpEx, we've talked about CAC. Let's talk about this third thing, which is your supply chain, your cost of delivery, variable costs in your business. Now, this is another area where I could see a number of things getting better. And what I want to point out here first is that this is not necessarily something where it's as obvious to me that there is a clear AI or incrementality style tailwind and trend line. But I sort of think, well, let me put it like this. At one point, Taylor Holiday put on X, he asked the question, what's the sort of like bull case for how tariffs fit into things, okay? And my answer to that question is that tariffs could be, they might be, they could be. I'm not saying they are necessarily. I'm saying they could be or might be a forcing function for building smarter supply chains. I am telling you in this episode about shaving costs and using AI to make your business run better and more efficiently. And that's why I'm so excited to tell you about a new sponsor on the show, RichPanel. RichPanel is awesome. And what I realized recently is that multiple of my clients were using RichPanel for their help desk software. And I started looking into why they were doing that as I was seeing other people talking about it. And I was like, whoa, this is really awesome. At the baseline, let me just tell you what RichPanel is able to do, just guaranteed. Okay. This is like the home run for you if you're an operator watching this and you're on one of the software services. Okay. RichPanel guarantees you that they can save you at least 30% relative to Zendesk or Gorgias while onboarding you in 2 weeks, and they can reduce your customer service tickets by 30% relative to any other software that you are using. That is a pretty strong guarantee. And they do that by being an AI first platform built from the ground up for the purpose or with the goal of leveraging AI to make customer service experiences better for your customers and more cost effective for your brand. It is awesome software. It works great. I've taken a really careful tour of it. It just does things that are really, really cool. Like, for example, one of the things that has plagued me as a meta ads guy for forever has been moderating comments on social. And now with RichPanel, you can actually use an AI bot that will go and do your comment interaction for you very quickly and at mass scale in a way that frankly is the best solution to this problem I've ever seen, and get people answers to questions that they need, all those kinds of things. It's just really, really cool. Brands are saving a bunch of money and delivering excellent software, excellent interactions with their customers. The ratings from customers are extremely high. It's just awesome. Go check it out. Get on a call. If you're on Gorgias or Zendesk, this is a no-brainer. 30% savings and costs. Go check out RichPanel today. RichPanel.com. Tell them that I sent you. Go to RichPanel.com. That essentially, I've said for a while, well before tariffs came in, you've heard me say that supply chains are the most under-optimized part of an e-commerce business. I really believe that. Okay, so if that's true, the reason people have done that is because they're focusing on other parts of the business that are easier to optimize faster in their view, right? It's not because they're lazy. It's because there's other things that look like bigger opportunities. But the moment tariffs come in, they force you to say, whoa, we better optimize this a whole bunch. We better do a lot of things. Now, there's probably nothing you can do to optimize your way out of 130% tariff or whatever the China number is exactly, okay? So like you're not going to be able to shave 130 points of margin or, like 70% of your margin or 60% of your margin or whatever that is, and sort of get back to where you were before in most cases, okay? But you might be able to shave some, okay? The phrase necessity is the mother of invention is exactly right in this case, right? That phrase, the idea is when things are really hard, it forces you to get creative in your thinking. And I believe that this can and will have this kind of impact in our space. I think it really can. And I'm already seeing it in some conversations that I'm having where people are getting on the phone with my friends at Move Supply Chain to say, like, can you help us do this? In fact, I am starting to work on my own brand. I'm going to come back to that more in a little bit, okay? There will be casualties. there will be casualties in this, but like I said, but at the same time, if brands start looking and saying, wait a minute, I need to have backup vendors. I need to think better about my financing. I need to think about looking for vendors in other parts of the world and make it so that my supply chain is more resilient. I need to think about how I can get cheaper cost of goods or do redesigning or whatever. There's all kinds of different things that brands are going to think about. It's really hard to generalize about because it varies so much category to category. And again, there are going to be casualties here for some people who just, no matter how much they try, can't survive at the moment. But I think it could actually force brands to rethink a lot of things in their supply chain they've just taken for granted. So my brands. Let me give you an example of how this has played out for me. Now, my brand has not launched yet, but we've been working on it for a little while. And the most expensive part of my brand's supply chain is actually the packaging, and it's built in China. I haven't said too much publicly about what the brand is, but and it's actually irrelevant to this right now. Just know that the most expensive part of the product is packaging. The packaging is made in China. It's sort of complex. It's a custom design package, and so because of that, I have immediately had to sort of slow down my potential rollout and rethink the supply chain. And I went and I and talked with Lara Guevara from Move Supply Chain, who's helping me build my supply chain, as I've said before, who went to Vietnam last week for the Global Sourcing Fair, visited a vendor, looked at my packaging sample, and immediately started sampling with a vendor in Vietnam. That vendor came back and had COGS for my packaging that were about, let's call it 20% higher at my MOQ, or at the MOQ, which is 1,000 pieces. Okay, about 20% higher than what I had initially looked at with my Chinese manufacturer. But if I could get it to ordering 3,000 pieces, so if I can get any level of scale here, basically, it actually meets my original Chinese MOQ, and that's like right away. I don't know that it was the first vendor she talked to. It was a little hard to find that vendor, to be sure, but she could do it. She found that vendor, and now it's not the worst thing in the world for me. Like, there are some challenges with it that aren't quite as easy, but I can go do that. And I suspect if we go and shop this and think about redesigns and some of those things, we could actually get that number down a little bit more and still end up with things. And it's also possible that I'm going to have in the process slightly higher MOQs, which is worse, but better financing, better lead times, and maybe better costs at some point, depending on how things go. Okay, but better financing and better lead times, shorter lead times would be a really big deal. And so right now it's forced us to pause. Right, we have a moment, and we have this advantage, which is that we haven't launched yet, we haven't ordered yet, we didn't get hit with some massive tariff. I'm like so grateful that we haven't launched the business yet, and that there's been some things slow. Side gig kind of stuff, right? But it has forced us to rethink that and look for alternative manufacturers. And I'm pretty impressed with what we can see elsewhere. We got to get samples still, but like, they say they can do it. They've seen what we're trying to do. They've already, other manufacturers have done it, and so it's not like they have to come up with it from scratch. And they're saying that, yeah, this is probably doable. And so I'm really interested to see if we can make it happen. That's the kind of thing that's going to be happening for lots of brands right now, and that's good. That's a good thing. It's going to force people to think in other parts of the world. It's going to force people to do all kinds of things. Who knows where else we could look? But as a starting place, it was like a really encouraging bit of news in this last week from talking to Lara. So put another way, right? The momentary challenge of tariffs is momentary, but the more structural changes, I think, are overwhelmingly accruing value to e-commerce operators, okay? Including the knowledge change of the supply chain side of things. I do think that's going to help in the long term in some way. Whether it has quite the same impact as incrementality or AI, I don't know. It could actually have a bigger one if people can get COGS cheaper in the long run. As I said, Polymarket is suggesting a 50% possibility that there's a new trade deal in the next couple of months, at least last I had checked, right? And look, pundits like me, in this case, are famously bad predictors of things because there's no accountability for their decisions, okay? But Polymarket does really well because people are actually putting money behind what they say. So if you want to know what somebody really thinks, watch what happens when they have to put money on the line, okay? But here's what I would say. I am still starting a brand. None of this in tariff moment or anything like that has stopped me from wanting to do that because I believe everything else I said. I think it's an incredible time for smart brands to keep digging into information to build a great P&L and build thoughtful consideration of what a good e-commerce P&L looks like. If you could still do that stuff well, it's great. If I was sitting on a bunch of capital, I would be like jumping right now to go buy businesses. In fact, soon I'm going to talk to Fan my friend Fan. Like, Fan has looked at a whole bunch of businesses in the last quarter. I think it's over 100. He's still in the M&A world, like thinking about buying businesses. I think it's the right move. I'd be, if I was him, pretty aggressive right now about trying to do that. I can't remember when this is going to come out. It might actually come out. I think it's going to come out before my conversation with Fan. So my conversation with Fan will come out in a few days after this. But if you want to get more of a sense of how somebody from the M&A side of things is thinking about this right now, really putting their money where their mouth is, subscribe, because you're going to want to get that episode. Fan's conversations are always great. He's a really smart guy. But in any case, all I'm saying is I actually am putting my money where my mouth is here. I am building a brand. I am trying to do this. It's sort of the ultimate hedge against the agency problem. But again, side gig right now. I don't expect it to be huge, but it's something that I'm thinking about pretty actively and pushing on. So what should you do? Okay. So what should you do? You should survive. I know that sounds too simple. I understand that. I obviously can't give you a kind of advice right now that is going to be applicable to every brand in this moment. I think you should do the things that people are doing, which is that you should more relentlessly shave OpEx. Like, maybe you can't save that much money on COGS, but maybe you can if you shop 3PLs. Maybe you can if you cut some software costs. Maybe you can if you get serious about AI and offshoring on your OpEx side of things. Maybe you can if you ditch your creative testing campaigns. Maybe if you go hunt down dollars in your business really seriously, that you can actually run a leaner business and get some of that cost back, because a dollar is a dollar. So whether or not you pay it to a tariff or pay it to a software company, it's still a dollar going out. So if you can shave it in one place, it's still a dollar that's not going out. So maybe that can get you part of the way there. But have that mentality. Try to survive as best as you can, and to try to think broadly about the future. Try to do also all of the things that good brands do. Release products as best as you can, supply chain permitting. Run sales that you need to run, etc. Be smart about your cash. All of those normal things that good brands do. Deploy your ad dollars efficiently. And at the same time, I do think right now you should be shopping your supply chain really aggressively. As much as you possibly can, there's no better time to start doing that. Again, even if that doesn't mean going to a different country, what happens if there is 20% savings, 30% savings? I mean, this is real. Like, I've talked to brands who have worked with supply chain experts. In fact, it was working with people at Move, who I've mentioned a few times now on this episode. Like, I've talked to brands who have saved like 30% on their COGS from doing that work. Like, it's possible. There's a real savings to be had. What happens if you can get 20 or 30% reduction in costs from your manufacturer in China? So they're going to work with you to maintain your business right now in this moment. What if you can get 20 or 30% off there, and at the same time you can shave some OpEx and you can shave that? Like, that's the survive mentality. And if you can just survive, I think you can be in a really, really good spot. If you can do that and at the same time start thinking long-term, building for the long term, I think the opportunity in e-commerce right now is as good as it ever has been, if you can just get through this moment. Hopefully the moment doesn't last too long. I mean, who knows? But hopefully the moment doesn't last too long. If it doesn't, you can be really well positioned to have a really good business. All right, somebody's gonna be mad at me at some point for like just not being negative enough right now. I know there's a lot of conversation all the time about things that are going wrong, and sometimes it just is like therapeutic to hear that. But yeah. Hopefully you hear this is what it is, which is like my most honest assessment of where things are at. Look, I'm an optimistic guy in general, and I think there's reason for that right now, and hopefully my perspective is helpful to you in the midst of the other ones. Hey, don't forget to follow up with me first, podcast@ajfgrowth.com. If you have any thoughts about this economic moment, about anything I said in this episode, reach out to me there, podcast@ajfgrowth.com, or tag me publicly on LinkedIn or on X @AndrewJFerris. I'd love to hear from you there. And of course, you can find everything I'm doing at ajfgrowth.com. Do also follow up with my great sponsors for this episode. If you're trying to save costs on software, those sorts of things, Workspace 6 is an amazing community. Go check them out, workspace6.io, rich panel for your customer service needs. Look, if you're on Gorgias or Zendesk, I can save you 30% guaranteed right now on your customer service costs by going to Rich Panel. So go to Rich Panel right now and check that out. You can do that at richpanel.com. So thanks so much for watching or listening. Do subscribe wherever you're doing that. Got a bunch of great episodes coming up, a bunch of interviews lined up that are going to be really good. Yeah, thanks. I'll see you next time.